Terima kasih, thank you very much. Good afternoon, selamat siang. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm very glad to be here to be a moderator of this very interesting session. Today we'll have one keynote speaker, and then 4 panelists. And I'll be very glad and very honored to lead this session. And this session title is Current Challenges, Solution and Best Practices in Reducing Carbon Emissions. And this is, I think, will be very related to what we have not only in Indonesia, but also in all of other countries in the world. We are talking about emission reduction, and we are talking about how to achieve the global emission reduction target, that in the long term, in the future, it will give benefit not only to us, but also to all of our children and our grandchildren and our grandchildren. So again, thank you very much for trusting me as a moderator here. So my keynote speaker today is Mr. Sudhir Sharma. He is the Program Management Officer, Energy and Climate Change, and GF Task Manager of the UN Environment. Previously, he was also the lead negotiator of the UN HSBC meeting, and I think he is more than an expert. He has very long experiences and very high knowledge on this emission reductions, as well as on the energy efficiency implementation. And we also have 4 speakers, Mr. Fadli Hamsani from the Schneider Electric Indonesia, and Ms. Pauline from International Energy Agency, and Mr. Matthew Black from the World Green Building Council, and Mr. Jonathan Drew from the HSBC Asia Pacific. So without further ado, I will invite our keynote speaker today, Mr. Sudhir Sharma. Sudhir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Terima kasih, Pak Hindarto. It's a pleasure being here. It's a pleasure also being here with the distinguished panelists from IEA, industry, and the finance sector. And of course, the participants to the conference. Let me first start with presenting the greetings from our Executive Director, Ms. Inger, and our Regional Director, Ms. Dechin, who send their greetings and congratulations to Maskeei on organizing conference and exhibition on a very important topic of energy and efficiency and conservation, which at UNEP we would say lies at the center of achieving net zero energy sector by 2050, in line with the Paris Agreement. I would also like to express sincere thanks to Maskeei for inviting UNEP to share our thoughts and views on this very important topic. And to begin with my few observations, I would first like to kind of contextualize it in the larger framework of what at UNEP we call the planetary health. All of us for the last, I think it's almost 1.5 years, have been facing the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic, which has brought unimaginable economic and social disruptions to all our countries. And from an environmental viewpoint, COVID has also actually resulted in an increased plastic pollution, mostly because we are all confined to our homes, unable to kind of go out and ordering things at home. This has had a serious impact on the environment. The COVID, on one hand, did show us that what an alternative development approach could deliver in terms of, as we have seen, the reduced air pollution in cities because of various factors. It has led to a reduction in greenhouse gases. Though since that, these have again started rebounding back. But unfortunately, I mean, this cannot be the way in which we would like to achieve this, because this is also not sustainable. So while we are struggling in the damage of COVID-19, we at the same time need to keep in mind, while recovering from it, the triple planetary crisis that threatens and which underlies the COVID-19 pandemic. It's the climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. These are three planetary challenges that we face, which have actually also led to the situation that we face today. Zoonotic diseases have the same root origin as of global warming. It is aggravated by loss of biodiversity and pollution, and which basically are connected with the unsustainable consumption and production and unsustainable demand and the offer that the economy makes. If you look at the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, it very clearly warned us of the extreme consequences of global warming, as the temperatures are not kept well below 2 degrees centigrade, and countries in Asia are among some of the most vulnerable countries if you look at from the impacts of the climate change. Similarly, if one looks at the Global Biodiversity Outlook, which was published by the Biodiversity Convention, it again highlights the need and urgency to restore the ecosystems which are connected back to the underlying causes of zoonotic diseases. It also does address the climate change challenge and, of course, the balance between nature and economic development. Similarly, if we look at the 6th Global Environmental Outlook, which is produced by the UN Environment, it underlines the health and prosperity of humanity is directly tied to the state of our environment. During this COVID crisis, the return to so-called old normal settings seems appealing. Nevertheless, we need to keep in mind that this is the old normal that got us into this situation. Zoonotic diseases like COVID-19 are the result of unsustainable consumption and production, pushing habitat loss and driving humans into closer contact with wildlife. So when we address energy, it is not just about the economic factors of climate change, but equally important is how does the extraction, the conversion and the use of energy actually links to air pollution, environmental health, destruction of ecosystems, and which have a larger consequences on the sustainable development of all economies. Now, looking at energy efficiency and conservation, I think I would first of all like to congratulate the International Energy Agency for the very timely and excellent report on net zero energy sector. As the report points out, energy-related emissions account for about 73% of the GHG emissions, of which electricity and heat generation account for about 41%, and another 48% is about the end-use sectors. And quite significant are also the fugitive emissions from energy extraction and production. So the energy lies at the center of addressing the climate change challenge. Again, if one looks at the IEA report, it estimates that 40% of the reductions of the emissions actually could come from energy efficiency, both on the supply side and as well as the demand. It also looks at the the opportunities that are there of moving the end energy use to electricity, which is more efficient as is in transport sector and industry, but also gives the possibility of decarbonizing that energy by producing electricity from renewable sources. The energy efficiency is also equally important in stopping the creation of new fossil fuel-based capacities by reducing the demand. And we have all heard about how we need to immediately take actions on creation of fossil fuel, especially coal-based capacities in Asia. And I think the first step towards that, for that to be possible, is to start addressing energy efficiency. In ASEAN countries itself, over the next decade, 140 million new consumers representing 16% of the world total will be added. This will add a huge amount of increase in energy demand from the new consumers, as well as the ones which are already there on the planet. Same time, if we look at the report, we need to and also, as we will see later, we do have all the experience and necessary tools to be actually in a position to achieve these reductions from energy efficiency. First, one of the big challenges that most of the countries face is lack of data and lack of infrastructure to collect the necessary data to track the actions on energy efficiency and the improvements. Recently, UN system led by SCAP carried out a review of SDG 7 goals, and these highlighted the challenges and the ability to track energy efficiency indicators both at national level and sectoral level. Lack of data also makes it difficult for countries to first understand how well the country is performing, and with respect to assess whether the targets would be achieved or what more needs to be done, or how the effectiveness of specific policies and programs can be improved. The challenge here is that though energy efficiency and the data is required, it is still collected on a basis of preparing assessments and reports. It's not integrated in the data collection systems of the country as is with the data that the countries collect for planning their economic growth. And that's the level of integration of data that is required to be able to have this information available to everyone, the planners, the implementers, the assessors, which makes it possible, therefore, to have a very clearer picture of what is achieved and what needs to be achieved. There seems to be a reluctance both on the part of the governments as well as on the commercial enterprises and industries to report data. Though the evidence is very clear that having this data makes it very economically beneficial for entities and for economies to actually identify where the energy wastages are taking place and where these wastages could be reduced. The second challenge that we face is, from our perspective, is that we do have a lot of experience on energy efficiency, and especially on the tools. Is the challenge of the implementation, or the challenge of the effective implementation. The tools of standards and labeling for appliances, for industries, for transport sector, has been used quite widely across the globe. and quite successfully. Most of the ASEAN countries and developing Asia have implemented standards for appliances and buildings. The challenge is that most of these standards are actually nowhere close to the level of efficient appliances that can be actually produced and supplied in the market, and are actually being produced and supplied in many of the markets. If one looks at the standards which are there in India and China, even those standards are way better than the standards which have been established in many of the other Asian developing countries. So there is a gap here. Similarly, if one looks at the transport sector, there has not been an application of these efficiency standards or fuel efficiency standards, which have been successfully applied in Europe, in US, to actually reduce the energy consumption of vehicles in the system. So that's again something that we see as common, though there have been efforts going on for quite a while. Similarly, if one looks at the buildings, which is another major sector in consuming energy, there have been standards which have been adopted, but then most of these standards are not very effectively implemented. So this is also the case for industries as well. So what we see is repeatedly the scenario where these standards have not been implemented, even effectively, even if they have been put into regulation. And that brings us to the associated challenge of the monitoring and enforcement infrastructure that is required. Now, in a connecting challenge that we see is that public procurement is a large part of demand creation in most of the developing economies. In many of the sectors, it could reach to 30% of the GDP. And yet, one sees very few cases where public procurement has integrated energy efficiency standards into the procurement processes. And just achieving itself could create a significant demand for energy efficient appliances. And I would not speak about the financing. I think we have a panelist who would talk about it, but there are two levels of issues on financing. One is the whole structure of financing is based on project financing, and it doesn't cover the specific needs of energy financing. And that creates a difficulty for large energy efficiency investments in industrial sector. But on the other hand, one looks at the small, decentralized small appliances. It's the small investments and the aggregation, which is a challenge. And there needs to be a lot of reforms in the financing sector to allow institutions to be able to establish finances. The last challenge which I would basically talk about is creating of public awareness. There have been a lot of efforts in creating public awareness, a lot of campaigns around standards and being popularized, but somehow this has not been carried out in a sustained manner for the consumers to understand how their choices actually not only are beneficial to them, but also beneficial in a large sense to them through the environmental benefits that it accrues. There has not been that sustained an effort to integrate this into the curriculums at education level of the students and the future generation, so that energy efficiency becomes a habit with people rather than something which had to be learned about. So those are some of the things that we see where there is a lot of good information available, a lot of applications which have been done, which are available, but somehow they have not been scaled up to a scale where actually can start making an impact and a difference. And that is where the challenge lies in achieving the 4% target that the IEA report says is needed to be in line with the Paris Agreement. Now, in terms of, if we look at the best practices, I think number of best practices available. The first crisis of energy efficiency occurred in 1973. We have so almost 50 years of experience. the best practices in terms of energy efficiency standards and labeling, best practices in terms of energy efficiency mandates for utilities, that basically helps with the small scale and individual consumers being brought into the mechanism of financing and implementing energy efficiency measures. One particular one which has been quite successful, I would refer to, is in India, the Perform, Evaluate and Trade scheme for industrial energy efficiency. I mean, this is just one example. There are many such programs which have been implemented, and these cases are available to us, which could be very easily replicated and scaled up. But for some reason, this effort has not yet taken place and needs to be scaled up. Moving on to the transport sector, where actually one sees a significant lag in Asian developing countries, is the application of, as I mentioned, CAFE standards, which have been very successfully used in US to help manufacturing industry move towards better energy efficiency of the fleet, or the CO2 taxes in Europe, which again has been very successful in not only helping adopt technologies which move towards zero carbon fuels in transport sector, but also towards energy efficiency. And a key element that I would like to highlight here is also the fact that the best energy efficiency measure is public transport and non-motorized transport. And this is very key for Asian countries as well as ASEAN, given the issue of air pollution, congestion, and also an equitable access for mobility in these cities. So these are some of the good practices where a lot of experience exists and which can be copied for successful implementation. One last aspect which I would highlight before I notice that I am overshooting my time is the carbon pricing instrument. As we are moving towards a more kind of a tighter time frame in which we need to decarbonize our economies, carbon pricing instruments have worked quite effectively in both introducing energy efficiency as well as bringing in low carbon fuels. And this provides also, these instruments provide the necessary flexibility to the industry in terms of choosing the options that would be applied within their own range of solutions available to them. So with that, I would like to conclude that the challenges are not unknown in this field. They are quite known. We have a lot of experiences and a lot of best practices which can be easily and scaled up. And I'm sure the panelists following would be presenting some of these in more details, as well as the accumulated wisdom which is there in the room today and can be shared across with us to see how we leverage it in moving forward. I look forward to the perspectives which our distinguished panelists will present and a good discussion. And I wish the organizers a successful conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sudhir. Yeah, thank you very much, Sudhir. This is very, very good presentation, and I think we learned a lot from your presentation. I have one question, only one question, before we can start. The panelists to present their presentation. So the question for you, Sudhir, is we know that the Paris Agreement has started this year for the implementation, but we also know that the most discussed in the energy sector currently is the coal phasing out and the renewable energy implementation, not the energy efficiency, particularly if we talk about the net zero emission. In this regard, what do you think about the role and the importance of the implementing energy efficiency in achieving global emission reduction target compared to renewable energy and coal phasing out implementation? Thank you.
Thank you, Pa. That's a very good question. I think one cannot look at one part of the solution as the only solution. Renewable energy and energy efficiency are the twin solutions that we need to address together. Yes, the emphasis has been a lot on the coal phase out, and the reason for that is that the capacities which are created, whether it be the mining of coal or the power generation from coal, would last for 40 or 50 years. Given the time frame that we have in which the world needs to return to net zero emissions by 2050 to be within the Paris Agreement, it is very key to start looking at how to start curtailing the coal capacities and start phasing these capacities out which already exist. For a very simple reason, in the sense to have a possibility of sticking with the Paris Agreement pathways, but also at the same time to avoid any kind of economic losses that countries might face because of early shutdown, capacities that might be necessitated in the future. But to be able to reach there, as the IEA report says, by 2030, one of the key elements and focus has to be energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, as they say, is the cheapest form of renewable energy. So that has to be tapped into. Energy efficiency plays an important role in the sense by reducing demand, we are at the same time reducing the demand for creating new supply sources. And that helps a lot in terms of avoiding creation of further fossil fuel based power generation or energy extraction projects. So energy efficiency is an important tool in facilitating the reduction of overall energy demand that is required. And it also reduces the overall cost of the energy supply as we move forward. So it is not, so think about renewable energy without energy efficiency.
Okay.
Would be actually looking at renewable energy at a very high cost to the society. So energy efficiency is critical, and I would say the most priority action that needs to be taken over the next 10 years to allow us that gap to be able to transit out of fossil fuel input.
Thank you very much, Suresh. So energy efficiency first, and then followed by another emission reduction in the energy sector, right? Okay. With that, I will give the floor to my first panelist. It will be Mr. Fadli. Sorry. Yes, Mr. Fadli is from the Schneider, Indonesia.
Yes,
Mr. Fadli, yeah, Mr. Fadli Hamsani will deliver presentation on the importance of the technology in the emission reduction and, of course, in the energy efficiency. So, Mr. Fadli, the floor is yours. But remember, 10 minutes is the limit that you have. Thank you.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for the time. So I would like to try to have a short presentation on what we can do and what is our experience on this challenge of the energy management, energy efficiency, and also talk about the solution and best practices that we have done. Also, when we talk about the energy efficiency specific topic, and talk about the reducing the carbon emission. So as we know that this is really an opportunity, and we know that now is the world energy is changed, that the more electricity, the 2 times of the faster growth of electricity demand compared to energy demand by 2040. As I mentioned also from our speaker, key speaker before, that really talk about the climate change. It really talk about the energy used in industry. So Schneider Electric as energy management specialist in industrial automation that move forward to the digitalization also now is very focused on this portion of energy efficiency. It's not only in our factory in the world, but also we have our customers to do the energy efficiency on their enterprise. So we know now also the more digitalization is one of the impact. So it's a more connected device that they will use or demand on the energy management is there. And we know about the decarbonized, so and also more on the decentralization. So if we know that in our Schneider Electric we have focused on that topic, and we have one of the solutions, the EcoStruxure power. We're trying to work in our enterprise is on the topic of the data centers, on the topic of our customer in the health.
So, Pak Fadli, can you still with us?
I also can't hear them.
Okay, please continue.
Sorry, Pa. I think I have some issue just now. So I'll restart again to share my screen.
Please.
Pa Dicky, you can see me?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Sorry for that. Okay. So if we see now what we are doing in the environmental sustainability, we reduce the environmental impact, what we call that the green company. So we focus on that. So not only on the technology point of view, but on process and also on the people. So when we talk about this topic, we have some solution that we deployed and implement in our factory in the globe, and also showing to you later on what is the impact of the energy efficiency, what we have done in industry, and also we are sharing this success and to help our customers to do this energy efficiency for them. So when we talk about the efficiency in production, that we know that it will be impacted to the demand of energy. So why we do this? Because we understand in the operation, in the factory or in industry, the sustainability KPI they will put in place to see what is the impact of the business of operation itself. So one point, let's say we talk about the identify the energy and carbon saving opportunity. So a lot of industry now they are focused on this project. The second point is about the quantify the threat initiative to reduce the quantify the cost of the CO2 emission using the existing operational data. So I heard that our key speaker before mentioning about the lack of data energy management. We need to track, we need to monitor. At the end of the day, we need to take the action to use the renewable energy as one of the solution, let's say. So we need to optimize the operation, performance and sustainability consumption of energy and the raw material with the respective demand. So when we talk about that, why we do this? Because we know that what we are doing to reduce the carbon footprint also will be increasing our process efficiency by waste reduction and energy optimization, leading to improve the financial performance. For sure, the cost will be down and the margin will be increasing. So a lot of point that we know once we do the energy efficiency in production, we will get the business impact, and at the same time also we will giving more impact to the climate change and energy efficiency for the world. So what we do is in one of the best practices what I can share is to using the power monitoring expert. So we monitor the energy, we track the energy usage, and then we monitor that and we control that. it will be connected with our building management system. It will be connected a system platform in operation management to use and to improve and optimize our energy management. So why inform and decision to maintain station of and complied with what is the standardization have in the ISO standards. So if we go on that energy management, that what we deploy in our industry, which we complied with the ISO, another ISO, a lot of ISO, we can manage the energy review, we can do the analysis of the current energy performance, we help them to do the energy baseline, energy performance indicator, and also to use the monitor measurement and analysis. So this is one of the best practices what we did. Not only, again, it's not only in 200 deploy this to make the end gamers to help them to get the benefit. The sustainability action across the smart. You know,
it is very difficult to hear you, Pak. Fadli, please continue.
Yes, Pak. Sorry again. I don't know what happened with the network here. So wait. So I'm at the end of my slide. Pak.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Sorry for that. That's the difficulty of the virtual. Okay.
Yes.
So this is the high level of the benefit that I can share. It's almost the end of my presentation, Dicky. So if we see on that portion that the energy efficiency and sustainability by doing the best practice that I shared before to you in industry focus, so we can reduce average almost 30% of the cost saving, and we can reduce the CO2 footprint almost 20% in average of the customers. So if we step forward in Indonesia, so what we did, we can see in the globe of the customer project base, the 80% of the rate maintenance time, 15% reduction of the energy consumption over the past 3 years, and also improve the operational efficiency. So again, to reduce the demand of energy use in the industry. So if we go on Indonesia, what is the impact on our factory in Batam or on our factory in Cikarang, in Jakarta? So what we did there, we can reduce the 17% of the decrease the maintenance time, 44% reduction in maintenance downtime. It will be related and impacted on the energy used on our specific industry that we have in Batam. And the last is what we did. We do also our solar panel rooftop in our factory in Cikarang, and we can reduce 21% of the factory total consumption. And by that activity, we can reduce almost 160 carbon dioxide. Real action what we did in Schneider help also our customers to focus on the SDGs and also help the globe on to start to use the grid and the renewable energy to support all the energy efficiency activity. I think that's all, Dicky, what I can share. Thank you very much for the time. I'm so sorry about the network, disconnected network 2 times for that. So we are ready here to support and collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Fadli. I learned a lot from your presentation, and then also learn a lot about your experiences and the energy efficiency implementation in Indonesia. And we will have the second panelist here. It will be Mrs. Pauline Henriot. Apology for my pronunciation because I'm not French. But Pauline is working in IEA. If you remember, the IEA is the one who start all the net zero emission area that currently had been influenced almost all of the countries in the world. We are talking about net zero emission. But particularly in this pandemic situation, it will be very interesting to hear directly from the IEA about the digitalization of the energy efficiency in the world. The floor is yours, Pauline, please.
Because of the energy transition from a world where power flows from large plants to small consumer to a world where power flows in every directions. And this, in addition with renewable that are intermittent and variable, means we will have increased needs in flexibility. This is just a few examples of how hour-to-hour flexibility needs will increase in almost every country in the coming years. So that's the challenge. We will have to need to get the flexibility the system needs to be able to incorporate renewables and be able to manage the energy transition. In fact, you might say that, looking at the IEA scenario, that the problem is not the flexibility reservoir. What we see in World Energy Outlooks is that the theoretical potential for flexibility is huge. By theoretical, we discussed every consumption that could be flexible technically. The difficulty is harnessing this reservoir. And building are a large part of this potential reservoir, but now we need to harness it to make sure that every building that could participate in flexibility does it. Luckily, we have a big asset coming, which is digitalization. Fadli already mentioned how digitalization is increasing. If you look at trends in the previous year, population increased, GDP increased, electricity use increased, internet user increased even more, and as for digitalization, it even does not fit the slide if you look at how it increased. So that's one of the major trends that is coming in addition to power system decentralization, and that's one on which we will have to build to harness flexibility. So that's the general context. Now, where do building fit? Building can be part of these flexible assets. Looking in IEA scenarios, we see that in 2040, 1 billion households could be connected with 11 billion smart appliances able to participate in the electricity system. When I say connected, I mean connected and communicating with the grid. There will be obviously way more than that in connected device, all taken into account. And that could provide a huge reservoir of flexibility and provide a huge opportunity to incorporate more renewables. And that is massive, especially because the more generic picture of buildings is that we have a huge need for them to increase their flexibility and increase more generally their efficiency. Why? Because buildings are already today responsible for a large part of the energy-related emissions, And demand for building is rising, especially very quickly in emerging economies. So this means that if there is no efficiency done in building, we cannot manage net zero, but hopefully potential saving exists. And the net zero report by the IEA shows that just smart controls, I'm not discussing many other measures that could be taken around building, but just smart control, they could enable efficiency gains and reduce from CO2 by 350 megatons by 2050. Both pure energy efficiency plus consuming at the right time and consuming less at peak. And if we have a look at one more specific building use, which is cooling, we see the same trend. Cooling for now is a part of the problem. It's still small, but the demand is rising very quickly, especially in emerging economies. And we can expect that in 2050, the number of households with AC will be way more numerous than today. And that's why in cooling we need savings, and the good news is these savings, they exist. Again, the net zero report by the IEA shows that with residential building improvement, with higher efficiency equipment, we could have 2,000 terawatt-hour of energy saving globally in 2050. So technically there is a potential, but now again the big question is, how do we make sure this potential is managed? And here what is clear is that it's not just about knowing the technology. It's every pillar of a policy that should be used. We need investment procedure. We need to invest in procedures. We need to make sure that technology available are used, that current practices are used, which means capacity building, change in behaviors. We need investment in policy and institutions, because many of what we need means incentives, mean tracking uptake, means requirements, building codes, all these things. And last, we need investment in hardware, not just the final connected appliance, but all the basic building blocks that will help connected buildings work, so sensors, smart metering, demand response enabled appliance. And my main key message here is that we need all that. It's not just a question of technology. You might say that if it were just technology, it would be an easy task, but we need investment in procedure, in learning how we operate, in policy, in market design. We need investment in hardware, and then digitalization will be able to yield all the benefits and make sure that buildings are part of the energy transition and not part of the problem. So that's how we are working today at the IEA. We have launched a program that's called TRIDEN, or Digitalized Demand-Driven Network, on which we are working and will be working on the coming years. And we will be looking more specifically at all these pillars on and axis of work to develop tool and policy guidance documents. And so we are all very happy to interact with any of you on further on all these subjects. Thanks a lot for hearing me.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for keeping the time, exactly 8 minutes. Yeah. Yes, we learned from Pauline's presentation that here we must aware to the energy consumption in our building. We can reduce and save the energy consumption in the buildings, as well as we can make digitalization among all others technology that are implemented now in the world. And again, the IEA give us more insight from their plan and their research on the reducing of the energy in in the world, not only Indonesia. I always said in Indonesia, but IE is international, not only in Indonesia. Yes, thank you very much, Pauline. And our third speaker, our panelist, will be Mr. Matthew Black. Matthew, the floor is yours.
So hopefully everyone can see that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the organizers and for the conference for inviting me. It's been a fantastic session so far, and I'm hoping to go over the work of the World Green Building Council and the Advancing Net Zero project in relation to the current challenges, solutions, and best practice at reducing carbon emissions within the built environment. So, the World Green Building Council is an international organization made up of over 70 local national green building councils across the world, of which GBC Indonesia is one. Week released our annual status report that goes into detail about all of the activities in the last year, from green building councils, from signatories to our net zero carbon buildings commitment, and innovations across the industry, really. So it's a great place to have a bit of a catch up on all of the activities from the last year. But in terms of emissions to do with the built environment, we know a lot of these figures, and many of you will be familiar with these figures coming up on the screen now, but you can see that building operations and the construction of buildings take up of around 40% of global emissions, 28% of which are operational emissions, and the remaining are embodied and to do with materials and construction involved in the buildings that we live, work, and play in. And so how do we tackle these emissions? It's really important moving forward. For World GBC and Advancing Net Zero, we have a whole life carbon vision that you can now see up on screen. And this framework really outlines how we expect the built environment industry to work towards total decarbonization. And you can see in the distance, there's the 2050 goal that all new buildings, infrastructure, and renovations will have net zero embodied carbon, and all buildings, including existing buildings, will have net zero operational carbon. Earlier than that, we have a really crucial 2030 deadline, because as we all know, in order to keep up with the 1.5 degree scenario outlined by the IPCC, that we need to achieve a 50% of reduction emissions by 2030. So what does this mean for the built environment? Well, we believe that all new buildings, infrastructure, and renovations will have to have at least a 40% less embodied carbon by this point, with significant upfront carbon reductions. And all new buildings by 2030 must be operating at net zero operational carbon, sorry, I should say. And on the left-hand side, you can see our principles for achieving net zero operational carbon. And on the right-hand side, our principles for achieving net zero embodied carbon. And so a lot of the work that Advancing Net Zero does is based around outlining our vision of this to different parts of the industry and helping them to achieve what they can. And so within this mission, the work of the Green Building Councils is vitally important. And so here up on your screen now, you can see a selection of the different Green Building Council certification tools that can help people towards achieving net zero carbon within their local context. Achieving net zero is going to be different for each individual project, from country to country, from business to business. And so advancing net zero supports all of these different ways that you can achieve net zero. And obviously, as we're speaking at an Indonesian conference, down the bottom, you'll see that Green Building Council Indonesia have their own net zero ready / net zero carbon certification. And so I would strongly encourage anyone who is looking towards pursuing a net zero asset to go to GBC Indonesia to find out more, because they'll have some really specific local advice on how the best way to achieve net zero is for an asset in Indonesia. So some more advancing net zero numbers. We have 28 Green Building Councils participating in the project, and you can see here 14 of them have net zero certification schemes or a framework. Within these certification schemes, there's been over 800 buildings certified as net zero. And the next thing I really want to talk to you about is our net zero carbon buildings commitment. Because when we talk about the barriers and the solutions to net zero, advancing net zero, we really believe in the power of leaders within the industry showing a pathway of what others can achieve. So what is the net zero carbon buildings commitment? Well, we think that the commitment essentially challenges businesses and organizations through to cities and subnational governments to achieve net zero operational emissions by 2030 for the buildings under their direct control. So these industry leaders are actively working towards getting their assets to net zero by 2030, by that crucial earlier deadline, in order to keep in line with the IPCC's 1.5 degree scenario. And this is crucially important because their efforts as industry leaders will help the mainstream adoption of net zero as well. And we like to think of the commitment as an example of the ambition loop in action. And here you can see, by highlighting industry leadership action from the business side of things, this can feed into all levels of government policy, usually at a local level first, and then working its way up. And then this in turn can feed back into the more mainstream adoption of net zero techniques, which is vital. So the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, we have 141 signatories across the globe. These include over 100 businesses and organizations, 28 cities, and 6 states and regions. And all of these entities are committed to achieving net zero operational emissions for their portfolio of buildings by 2030. They do this through whichever means they see fit, but with a focus crucially on energy efficiency. We believe that it's not right that people just source renewable energy first and then that achieves net zero. It's really important that we focus on energy efficiency to bring consumption and demand down to the absolute minimum that it can be before we then focus on renewable energy. So the commitment is made up of 5 sections. We have commit, and as I've explained, this is where entities commit to all of their assets within direct control to operate at net zero by 2030. Entities are required to disclose their annual asset and portfolio energy demand and carbon emissions to ensure the robustness of the commitment, and so that the public can access this data set. They must act to reduce emissions by developing and implementing a decarbonisation roadmap that outlines key actions and milestones towards achieving energy efficiency and renewable energy for their building assets. And crucially, they must verify their performance annually via a third-party verification of data or through asset certification. So everyone knows that the progress being made is verified. And finally, to advocate for wider emissions reductions through their core business activities and influencing either their supply chains, clients, so on and so forth towards achieving net zero. Crucially, I think I'm running out of time, so I'll try and wrap this up. You can find out more within our detailed guidance document that outlines all of the requirements for the commitment. And I would strongly encourage any businesses who want to be seen as a leader within this space to have a look at the commitment, and then also in turn have a look at the Race to Zero, because that campaign is also going to be a crucial campaign in highlighting leadership moving forwards. Here I was just going to show you an example of one of our commitment signatories and the commitment profiles that we publish online that outlines the fascinating and crucial work that they're doing to decarbonize their own buildings portfolio. I think I'm at time, so I'll leave it there and hand it back to Dicky and welcome any questions shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you very much. And yes, we still have, last but not least, our speaker from the financing. So we have talked about the technology, we have talked about the commitment, we have also talked about the experiences on the emission reduction, as well as the certification that needed from the Green Building Council and IEA. But we need to see, is the financing available, and how then to connect it, all of this with the financing system that currently are still sometimes very difficult to be achieved. So Jonathan Drew is the Managing Director of the HSBC that will enlighten us with how then to connect all of this effort, all of our target with the financing scheme. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Right, Dicky, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you to the conference organizers for inviting me to join this fascinating discussion today. Your introductory remarks there, I think, left really little more to be said about the role for finance here. Clearly, a huge amount needs to be done. There are technologies available across many sectors to implement those changes. And so the role for banks and finance to bring capital to support that purpose in that sense is very self-evident. And the numbers are enormous, because I think the G20 estimates are order of magnitude $100 trillion over the next 15 years. And of course, a lot of that to happen across Asia's growing markets and in the energy sector. And of course, the challenge in Asia is particularly complex in growing markets, how you decarbonize and at the same time grow. So the role for banks really, I think, splits down into two parts. Because finance is so critical, it's important that banks address what we might call climate risk on their balance sheet, such that they remain robust, because we're clearly going to need a robust financial system to support us through this transition process. But then more proactively, I think it's important for banks to play a role in supporting the transition, shifting capital to where it's needed, i.e. supporting activities that are aligned to the societal agreements, 2 degrees C, Paris Agreement and so forth, but also reduce and cease to support activities that are not so aligned. So, for example, we at HSBC, I mean, for a long time now, we've been very focused on sustainability and how we impact upon the systems around us. Last year, most recently and notably, we made public our own commitment to net zero, both commitment to reduce our operational emissions to zero by 2030 and to align our so-called financed emissions, or the emissions of our clients, to be net zero by 2050, again in alignment with the Paris Agreement. Now, of course, commitments are great, but commitments are worth little without actions. So we are now embarking on a whole series of actions, and I'll touch upon a couple of issues generally that I think the banking sector, that we're obviously focusing on, the banking sector needs to address. On the risk side, and talking to bankers and financiers out there, there is an awful lot of good work out there written on how risks might be categorized into transition risks and physical risks, the types of areas where these risks might arise, whether it's in changes in technology, whether it's in shifting market demand, or whether it's the possible advent of new legal or policy or regulatory frameworks. Mr. Sharma referenced carbon pricing early on. Of course, that will have a big impact as carbon pricing becomes more widespread. And I think also critically for banks, the need to assess the role of social impacts in the transmission mechanisms as to how impacts on the environment then impact back on the economy and the world of finance. There are a large number of tools out there that banks are working on, such as scenario analysis, and this is sort of long-dated financial forecasting. To do scenario analysis, you need a model, of course, but you also need two other things. You need some assumptions, and therefore reports such as the IEA report looking at energy transition pathways are going to be critical to put into that type of analysis. But you also need data about your own clients and your own asset positionings if you're going to assess the risks, not just the sort of physical characteristics of, for example, a physical asset that a bank might be financing, but also an understanding of the transition pathways, strategic objectives that an individual borrowing client is looking to address. So key actions to be taken in the area of risk management. On the area of shifting capital to positively support the transition, again, there's been a lot of work going on around the development of financial products, notably the so-called labeled products, and there are broadly two types of those: the products that's labeled as green, where the use of proceeds of that financing is then applied to activities or businesses that will deliver environmental improvements or are indeed aligned to the 2050 objectives, but also another class of financial product that's grown very quickly, which is sustainability-linked products, both in the bond market and in the loan market, where the providers of capital provide an incentive to the users of that capital that if they improve their financial performance, then they get a better financial outcome through a better cost of financing under that structure. So as Mr. Fadli said in his comments around, better financial performance for better environmental performance, better sustainability performance, the financial markets are now reflecting that. And we're seeing these label products trade at better prices, stronger prices from both the issuer and the investor perspective. There's opportunity there. And we're seeing volumes grow. So the labeled bond markets grew something like 70% last year. This year to date, we've had nearly $500 billion of sustainable debt issued. That represents about 11% of total fixed income issuance in the capital markets. So this is not a niche product anymore. And similarly, in loan markets, we've had more than a doubling of the size of the markets this year. Nearly 350 billion of green and sustainability-linked loans written. And of course, many of those, and certainly the sustainability-linked products, will require good data, good metrics. So again, to Mr. Fadli's comments around what Schneider can provide in terms of measurement and KPIs and reporting, if that data is available, then that information can be structured into transactions to deliver a lower cost of capital for the entities who are using that equipment and delivering that data. So that's key. And similarly, in the area of, and a lot of good important comments from Pauline and Matthew around the role of the real estate sector, particularly across Asia, given the high rates of urbanization that we're now facing, huge impact from real estate and fixed assets. And of course, again, the role of the standards that Matthew talked about, again, are critical to mobilizing capital. Good, strong green standards enables capital to move very quickly and very efficiently to finance those buildings in preference. And many banks, like HSBC, are now moving to a point where, not quite yet, but almost the only buildings that we're financing now are indeed buildings that have green certification. And as Matthew talked about, as we now drive to saying, well, we need operational carbon at zero by 2030 from buildings, those should be the only buildings we need to be financing now, again, driving as well towards that ultimate target of the longer life cycle estimation of carbon in all the activities we do, which I think Matthew described as embodied carbon. So the capital is there. If you look at principles for responsible investment, signatories to that, people who've said we're going to invest sustainably, more than 3,000 signatories now with more than 100 trillion of assets under management. That's nearly 2/3 of the investable private capital in the market. So the money's there. It's now just the opportunity. How do we connect it? How do we develop the products? How do we put the standards there? How do we have the policy support to enable that to flow? And on the flip side, the importance for banks to actually then critically assess their clients as to whether that client that the bank is allocating capital to is and has developed and is applying and is taking action upon a robust transition pathway. I'll say one final word on energy efficiency in the various sectors where capital will need to be applied, and it has, as speakers have said, Mr. Sharma said, energy efficiency in one sense it's the sort of the low-hanging fruit of decarbonisation, but from a financing perspective, it's really tough. And there are various reasons for that, which not only include sort of lack of information, they include, as Mr. Sharma referenced to, some weaknesses in public procurement processes, because it's often, not always, but increasingly less so for hopefully about upfront cost. There needs to be a drive to more looking at life cycle cost, and that way we'll get capital more efficiently allocated to the critical investments that are going to be needed to deliver on this transition. Dicky, I'll pause there because I know you've got some questions for the group, but and I look forward to that discussion.
Thank you, Jonathan. And it is will conclude our understanding on how to implement the energy efficiency. But I have a question to all of you, and is because you are the last presenter, Jonathan, the last panelist. So I will ask you the first question to you. Do you have any suggestion on how to implement energy efficiency in Indonesia, in particular to achieve our national target on emission reduction and green recovery? We know that we are still in the pandemic situation, and we have a very high target, and there are a lot of banks, a lot of projects that need to be done, but still there are also many difficulties now. So if you have any suggestions for this country for implementing the energy efficiency, please.
Well, thank you for that question, Fadli, and I think in a sense it's an easy question to answer, because my principal recommendation would be to listen carefully to my previous speakers and panelists, who I think between them gave a pretty comprehensive summary of really the areas that need to be addressed around energy efficiency. So smart procurement is critical, because if you procure only thinking about upfront capital costs, you're not going to make the right decisions when it comes to the carbon impacts, many of which happen over the operational period, and those impacts can be far greater than the upfront costs. Then I think financing, banks are very, very sensitive and very alive now, much more alive to the benefits of those and ready to bring the capital to support that.
Thank you very much, very comprehensive answer. And you also mentioned to all of the speakers here, but I want to hear from Matthew. Matthew, you have the similar question, but plus, you know that we have also here in Indonesia the Green Building Council Indonesia, and we have a lot of activists, a lot of projects on green buildings and energy saving in buildings, as well as the emission reduction. So I want to know, do you have any suggestion for us in Indonesia then on how to implement your concept and how to reduce the emission? Because you just explained the new concept of zero carbon building, and while we just learned what is the green building, so you are more forward from us. So please.
Sure. You know, I think implementing energy efficiency is the first step towards achieving, you know, a net zero carbon operational building. And a net zero carbon operational building is when the energy balance is at zero on an annual basis. So either, you know, the asset is able to generate enough renewable energy on site to cover its outgoing operational emissions, or this is also compensated by off-site renewable energy, or maybe as a last resort, offsetting or offsets. In terms of achieving energy efficiency, you know, we have all the solutions. You need to be making sure that building facades are efficient, building systems are energy efficient, not installing fossil fuel heating or cooling systems, making sure they're powered by renewables, all of the above. And these solutions should be relatively readily available now for people to implement anywhere in the world. And the key point to get across is that the reason why we're pushing for this 2030 deadline for net zero operational carbon is because we feel it is achievable now. And that's why we're pushing for industry leaders to adopt this and act as, you know, examples within the market. But the more that people do this, the more it will drive market demand, and the more it will bring down associated costs, increase availability, and generally improve market maturity. So the more people that take up this challenge and push towards net zero, then the easier it will be for all of the people coming after them. So that's my advice for implementing towards energy efficiency. Everyone should be pushing towards it to make it easier for everyone else.
Thank you very much, but I think it is not as easy as you thought, but still okay. We need to work hard on it. Pauline, you have presented to us a lot of information.
that. So the first point that I think is good to share here is Pauline just now is mentioning about the digitalization and digital transformation. And we know also in Indonesia, Dicky, in our country, we have a program what we call the Making Indonesia 4.0, and the government really pushing the digitalization more. And when we see on that portion, based on our experience, when we talk also to the customers, the first, when you want to do digitalization in industry, look on your energy management.
During the pandemic situation. So you are first, Pak Sharma.
Okay, that's a challenging one. In terms of, I would say the biggest challenge would be public procurement. If the public government can move into public procurement, it can get the energy efficiency going, it can get the economic recovery going, and it can actually get a green economic recovery.
Thank you very much. And then I will ask the same question to Pak Fadli. So, Pak Fadli, what will be our biggest challenge on implementing the energy efficiency in this pandemic era? Only 3 words maximum.
Senior level management commitment and
Recording in progress.
So, what will be your answer?
I think I'll go with robust commitments and something else at the end that I haven't quite thought of yet. Robust commitments and increased.
Okay, robust commitment.
Yeah, I've lost the end of it, but yeah, thank you.
It is very difficult only in 3 words. Yeah. And then last but not least, Mr. Banking, Mr. Jonathan, what will be?
I would say rethink and change.
Sorry?
Rethink.
Okay, rethink.
And change.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so with those very powerful words, I will end this session and then we'll give it back to the IEECCE, and thank you very much for all the speakers. Thank you very much for all panelists, and it is a pleasure and great honor for me to be the moderator. I learned a lot, and I believe that everybody else that joined in this session also learned a lot from you guys. Again, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, selamat sore semuanya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dan ini sesi saya berikan lagi pada panitia. Thank you very much.